Hello and welcome to the SustainabiliTREE podcast with me, Katie.
And me, Mike. In SustainabiliTREE, we will explore all things trees and woodlands with a specific focus on the issue of plastics within the forestry sector.
In each episode, we will be looking at a variety of topics around this theme, including woodland creation, funding streams, plastic pollution, deer, soils, ecology, and so much more.
Shall we get started, Katie?
Let's go! Hello, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, Katie. How about yourself?
Yeah, all good this end. Thank you very much. Not quite summer anymore, but I do like it when it's autumn, winter vibes, to be fair. That's my seasons.
Yeah, I noticed it this week. I was out on site and kind of walked up in sunshine and then got totally soaking wet. And I never carry a coat, Katie. I just carry a fleece. So that was a really bad idea. But yeah, it's good to be out and getting ready for what we hope is going to be a busy planting season. Is it the same down your way?
Yeah, lots of planting schemes happening, and yeah, really good. I just hope for a wet winter for that to be able to be, easy to do, and then a wet spring, and then not, another heat wave again where everything gets scorched. That's the thing, is the weather's just so unpredictable, isn't it? You just got to have your fingers and toes crossed.
Is that your perfect kind of planting plan? Would it be a kind of wet winter, wet spring, and then good growing conditions for summer? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, but then some showers throughout summer, so don't get too hot. But at the same time, having a wet winter is not good for contractors and people who want to do woodland management, because then they can't get the machinery in, so you can't really win with it. But I will be doing some rain dances anyway.
Yeah, I think that's good. Well, it normally snows where we are, so if we can last winter was pretty damp, wasn't it? If we can get away with a bit of snow this time, that'd be quite nice. It's always nice taking groups out onto a site where there's kind of snowy mountains and things like that. So yeah, looking forward to it.
And it's fun because it's Christmassy. I love that time of year. But we have a juicy topic this time round, don't we, on this episode? So yeah, we're going to be talking about deer and browsing pressure. Which obviously links to why we need to protect trees in the first place. And obviously, as you guys know, me and Mike have a big passion about plastics and sustainability and sustainability. See, I've got SustainabiliTREE on the mind.
That's good. Keep the brand going.
It's good. Yeah. In forestry. So yeah, sort of trying to link things up. So yeah, we're just going to chat about why we even need to use protection in the first place. Obviously, we've covered little bits here and there before. But yeah, Mike has a different experience up in the Dales as to I do in Essex, and different people who are listening to this across the UK will have different experiences as well. But we're going to do our best, aren't we, Mike, to cover as much as we can.
Yes, we'll try. I think that this topic kind of daunted me when you pulled it out of the hat last month. Because I can't say it's my kind of highest of expertise, and we don't see a massive amount of deer in the Dales, but they do cause some issues, especially a couple of schemes that I've done. They have caused some issues. So yeah, looking forward to getting into this one. So I guess it'd probably be good for me to start and say what I see in the Dales, if that's all right, Katie.
Yeah, what species have you got up there?
Well, it's basically roe and red.
Okay.
Is what we see in the Dales. I mean, it does differ across the park. The actual browsing pressure is quite low, considering kind of the landscape, but I guess there's not a great deal amount of trees in the Dales, so there's nowhere for deer to kind of congregate anyway. So they're not in kind of massive numbers across the park, but they do cause some issues. So we have, as I say, we've got roe on the site I manage. We've got roe and we have got red. I believe there's Sitka just on the border of the park with the Dales and Forest of Bowland, and I know in the Forest of Bowland there are some kind of fallow moving around as well. So we're probably quite lucky in terms of we haven't got that kind of transient population of deer. But when they do get into plantations, they do obviously cause some issues. And this is a really leading question, Katie, but I know you have some issues down there, so I'm going to put my feet up and listen to the tale of woe from the Essex area and what you have to deal with.
Yeah. So across Essex and Suffolk, we've got a variety of different species. So like you say, we've got the transient species like fallow, which causes the biggest problem for us. We have varying size herds, but some very large herds, and they move between different farms, different woodlands, different landscapes, and yeah, sometimes cause chaos as they go. But we also have roe here as well. We have a lot of muntjac, and they are obviously a lot smaller than other deer, but they breed all year round. So they are a constant population, and because they're so small, they hide in the scrub. They do really well at sort of keeping out of people's way, but you can definitely notice their impact on on woodlands, trees and hedgerows and things. But we also have here Chinese water deer as well, which is another really interesting one. They're another small deer, and that their population has sort of spread more. They're coming into Essex, and we've got them where I live down by the coast. So yeah, we've got a real variety of species that all do different things, impact on trees in different ways, which then obviously leads to us having to do different management techniques, different protection techniques. But yeah, we're going to speak a bit more about protection, a bit more about these different species as we go on. But yeah, overall in the UK, we have 6 species of deer. So, we're doing quite well, aren't we, Mike, in our places to sort of, got half and half roughly.
Yeah, absolutely. Am I right in thinking that it's just roe and red are our native deer, and then the other 4 species have been, is it the right phrase, imported over the years, probably for kind of sporting reasons and things like that?
Yes, yeah. And again, it's quite interesting, I think, when people talk about, native and then the timelines that come along with that. But yes, them other 4 species have been, introduced. And then that it's interesting to have a chat then about, the term invasive as well. Invasive species, you hear that thrown around a lot. And I don't want to give anything away, but I do have some facts about that in my my quiz with you later, our random fact game that we have. So I won't say too much on that. But yes, so in terms of, I think it's difficult because in terms of native species, so you think, okay, our native trees, our native woodlands are used to them. Non-natives, they might browse in a different way, do things in a different way, so our habitats aren't necessarily used to them, but they have been around a while. Things have adapted a bit. I think the biggest issue that comes along with deer, and that's the same with most browsing animals, is when their populations become big, and then they don't have predators or anything to naturally keep them down, so then that can have more of an impact on different environments. And then obviously us focusing on trees and focusing on woodlands and establishment, that can be quite difficult because naturally, if you've got little deer going around nibbling like a roe deer, for instance, going through, they don't mob browse as such. They go through, they pick a bit, they go through again, pick another bit. That on a small scale, trees have evolved with that, and it's actually of benefit because then you get things being naturally coppiced and trees growing in different ways, and for biodiversity that's brilliant. That's what you want. But yeah, it's when it's done on a mass scale that trees can't then regenerate and they die. That's obviously where the problem comes from. But the question is, I'd say, is how do we know how many deer are out there for us to be able to make these decisions? How many, and how many of what species are out there?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I mean, obviously you have a lot happening down in Essex, and I've got a fair idea of what's happening across the Dales. But then I've done quite a lot of kind of case studies and work chatting to people in Scotland, and they have their own issues. Do you know what we need, Katie? We need some sort of expert in their field to tell us exactly what is happening out in the country, but more importantly, how we do kind of drill down and find out how many deer or other browsers are on a particular piece of land, and then what could be done. And as it happens, we spoke to a chap called Ben Harrower, didn't we, over the last few days, who from BH Wildlife Consultancy, who I'll tell you what, we'll just let Ben tell you who he is, and we hope you enjoy the conversation we had.
Ben Harrower here from BH Wildlife Consultancy. We specialise in wildlife drone surveys, and the bulk of our work is the sort of 6 species of wild deer around the UK, as well as wild boar, feral goats, and then some other species as well that are less common.
That's really cool. So what does that line of work consist of? What is it that you do day to day? How do you do that?
Yeah, so a few years ago we started doing the surveys, and back then it was just myself sort of picking up the different jobs around the UK, whether it was fallow deer in the south of England or red deer in the north of Scotland. But we've now grown to 5 operators, and we've got sort of GIS technicians working for us, statistician inputs in. We've got an aviation consultant. So the team's probably between part-time and full-time, around 12 people now. And so day to day for us would be booking in the jobs, organising logistics, getting people on the ground, and running a fleet of drones to survey given areas that might be a 10-hectare woodland creation site, or it could be a 20,000 hectare estate. So it's very varied.
That's so cool. So in the sense that you're using drones to do these surveys, you're producing these surveys obviously to gather data, why is it that you focus on deer and them other species that you mentioned?
Yeah, so the deer, what happened really with the drone story was, my background is a forester, as a forester to trade. So I've been in the sort of forest industry for nearly 20 years now, and we've always done different deer or wildlife census methods, whether it's visual counts, helicopter counts, dung counting, trail camera, plot estimates, and they've all got merit or use in their own right. But what was becoming apparent with the movement of drones and the tech that was getting put into these payloads was you were getting a daylight camera, a thermal imagery camera, laser rangefinder, and a super sort of high optical zoom, all in the one payload. And I think what dawned on me a few years ago was that change was paving its way for a new census method that could give sort of accurate minimum data, so minimum population figures of a given species at that time, and that data can be turned around very quickly. It's evidence-based, so photographed that are date and time stamped and geo-referenced, and then that can be used. So if you look from obviously we're talking woodlands here, with the nature of your podcast, and if you look at it in that context, it can help inform woodland creation, woodland establishment, regeneration very, very quickly. You can get that data.
That's such a good way of being able to collate it. And so from the research and the data you've collected so far, what would you say is the current extent of deer in the country, like number wise and also distribution wise as well? How do we break it down across obviously the whole United Kingdom, because that's what you cover, isn't it? Not just England, you cover Scotland and Wales as well.
Yeah, we cover the whole of the UK, and we're even now creeping into Europe. So we've got Republic of Ireland and German. We've got German contracts as well, some long-term German work happening. So yeah, we're seeing that whole picture really, and the distribution maps that we've got, because we've quite a large data set now, and we've actually covered, working the statistics out the other day, we've covered nearly 4% of the UK doing a deer related survey. So we've got quite a substantial data set there across the 6 species, and our distribution maps really mirror the likes of British Deer Society's distribution maps, which are very good. They've been built on decades of citizen science and sightings and an evidence base there. We do find the odd species creeping up in places where they weren't recorded previously, especially when it comes to boar. We're finding them in different areas. But I think what our data has really shown is, and particularly in England here, is when it comes to density, and the density of muntjac, Chinese water deer, and fallow deer can be absolutely astronomical compared to other parts. So you get these enormous fallow deer herds in central and southern England, and then you can get muntjac, especially in urban woods where they've probably got food sources around gardens and parks and so on. But you can get a sort of peri-urban muntjac population at exceptional densities as well. So I think that's probably my biggest eye opener with the UK coverage is not necessarily the distribution, which was reasonably well known, but it's expanding for a lot of species, but it's the density that's underpinning that.
Thanks, Ben. Can you take us through? I'm quite interested in the gear that you use, and I saw a presentation of yours not so long back where you got quite animated about the kind of new drone that you were getting and things like that. So, and we all love gear. Pretty much everybody loves gear, don't they? especially these kind of newfangled. It shows my age saying the word fangled, but especially these new kind of and drones and things like that. So, you kind of. Are you able to say kind of how much one of these drones costs, and then how are you doing your surveys at night? Are you using kind of thermal imaging? It's quite a leading question, because I'm going to ask you about kind of, have you ever seen anything that you shouldn't do in a as you've been doing a survey or anything like that? Any kind of interesting vehicular activity? But yeah, if you kind of take us through the kind of the gear you use and things like that.
Oh, well, we see plenty that we probably shouldn't see. But to go back on the gear initially, there's actually two businesses that we've got, and BH Wildlife Consultancy is the main survey business, and that runs mainly a fleet of drones that are a certain spec. So they'll weigh between. So weights is quite important when it comes to drones, because the legislation is focused around the weight. You've got 500 grams, 2 kilo, 4 kilo. These mean something in the drone world. So most of our commercial fleet will be between 4 and 10 kilos, and they will be doing payloads that can have 20 to 40 optical zoom, and that optical zoom allows you to really get a good detailed image of that animal. So all of the fleet are thermal imaging. So thermal imagery we just couldn't do the level of detail of our job without it. But yeah, in terms of our fleet, it's quite diverse. So we've got everything from a 500 gram micro drone with thermal to a 10 kilo one. In terms of cost, vary from a few £1,000 to over £20,000 per drone. So it's required a lot of investment straight back into the company. As I started out with one drone. I had to convince my wife to remortgage the house to buy the first drone and the pickup, which started the business. Wow. And that paved the way for then the second drone, and it just feels almost in the last few years it's just been a constant investment. But it's what it's allowed us to do is it's given us the capacity to then take on bigger areas and bigger landscapes. So we can now throw 5 commercial drones, even 6 commercial drones at a single landscape at one time, which means we can cover tens of thousands of hectares in a methodical, consistent way. Whereas when it was just me, I was restricted on how much I could cover in a day. So it's by investing, that investment of the kits will open the doors to doing bigger jobs, and we're constantly getting challenged on that. So we've got 2 jobs coming up in the next fortnight, and they're the 2 single biggest jobs we've ever undertaken, and the biggest one being 65,000 hectares. Wow. And that's starting. I'll leave home here on Sunday night, and there'll be several drones in that area and sweeping through that whole deer management group in Scotland.
Has anything like this ever been done before, Ben? Are you kind of a pioneer in this field?
I think lots of people have been trying drones out in different ways for different things. I think when the technology came out initially, It was a friend of mine called David who actually showed me the first drone. He had a thermal drone that he said, "Oh, you should see what this looks like for deer." And we trialed his technology, but back then it was actually essentially a sort of thermal camera wired into the drone. It wasn't an all-encompassing payload or an easy to use machine. It was sort of hardwired. And so we played around with that for a year or so, and then there was a tipping point, I think probably about 4 years ago, where the sort of off the shelf payload came out, where it was all built in and it all talked to the drone simply. And then since then we've had like the weatherproofing, waterproof, wind speed ratings, and easier to use, better screens, more accurate data, and I think that journey, yeah. So I noticed it quite early on and how useful it could be, but and then I think I was fortunate in some ways that in the right place at the right time with the deer knowledge background. So we've managed to offer our services around the UK, and we've got pilots across the country that can do this job up to the same standard, and we have a certain output that we give clients, and it's a full report breaking down species present, confidence in the survey. It could be male female calf ratio if that's desired. All the imagery is supplied as well, and then they get the maps and the heat maps showing where the population is, and then at the end there's a bit of a tailored conclusion as to, well, what does this mean for your bit of ground, because numbers mean very different things in different parts of the country. And we can go into that potentially in a little bit, but the certain parts of the country can hold a lot more deer than others, and that's a big thing when you're compiling those reports.
Thanks, Ben. I'm guessing that landowners have probably got a semi-decent idea of what's happening on their land. You'd like to think so, and I've probably got a kind of a figure in their head of how many deer that they expect. Do you, when you present your report, are they kind of surprised? Is it usually that the extent of deer coverage on that land is a lot higher, or do some landowners get it bang on?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So we see it all. So we see people that know the ground and have been on the ground a long time and are very honest with their forester, landowner, or they might be that, they're very honest about it, and they can be very accurate to the point where we've been within small percentage amounts of what someone's thought, and we thought, well, that's incredible, that they know the ground that well. But typically we'll get called in to areas where they're not sure, and then when we do it, we count more than they were expecting. So I would say the typical picture is we count more than they thought. That's definitely probably the sort of average mean. Sometimes people can overestimate, but there's an interesting, I've not managed to fully work this stat out yet, but when people see a group of, say, fallow deer, they'll estimate reasonably accurate up to a number, I'm going into hundreds here. And then when it tips into several hundred, then they start underestimating that figure. So we've got a couple of herds that we've counted now, and there's been over 1,000 fallow deer in that herd. But when people see that group in the countryside, they never really come up with that figure unless they've got imagery to back it up and they can count it. So it's really interesting, human perceptions, because the 3D view of a herd, once it reaches a certain point, is actually a lot more than you think. And it's only when you piece that image together that you realize there's a lot more. And the other thing as well is when we go through a survey, we encourage people to come with us, or the operator, so they can see everything, so they can see how transparent the process is. And this is 3 fallow deer, this is how they're recorded on the map, there you go, there's the image. It's just amazing how at the end of a survey, those ones and fives and tens, how they add up, and you can all sit around a table and do a sweepstake on what you think you've counted. And when you actually tally it up on the mapping system, you realize it's substantially more. Those multiple small groups add up to a substantial amount. So yeah, quite often people get it dead on. Quite often there's less than people think, but sorry, not quite often. Occasionally there's less than people think. Typically there's usually more. And it's just one thing to add to that point is the timing's key, because sometimes people compare counts. So when the counts we're doing right now, the summer counts, they will be quite substantially different to March-April count, because that's March-April's at the time when the population's at its lowest, whereas right now the population's at its highest with the summer recruitment. So timing's key, but yeah, we do see it all in terms of people's opinions.
Yeah, so I guess that's really interesting. So I guess that like you say, they're different day, night, they'll move around as well, so they'll impact, they might have one woodland in particular that they like to spend a lot of time in, but they'll move across, won't they? Arable fields, they'll move between various different habitats. So I guess on a landscape scale, that would make management then more difficult if they're moving around a lot. But yeah, like you were saying about the large populations that we have, there's a figure that's thrown around a lot, which is the 2 million deer across the United Kingdom. Obviously that's a rough estimate, but in your own personal experience, would you say that's a fair estimate, or would you say it's like more or less?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a question that put me on the spot. In terms of, take the red deer in Scotland. They're well studied by Nature Scot. There's a lot of foot counts by the deer management groups. There's a lot of helicopter counts, and you could say that the upland red deer population of a few 100,000 is largely well known and accepted. So I think there's no argument in say that species in that environment. I think what is sort of become shocking is, you go to places in say Kent or parts of Wales and there's almost no deer at all. And then you flip it to the other side and go to Norfolk or parts of Suffolk, and there's a number of species. So there was one survey we did where we hit all 6 species in the survey, and there was a single flight point that I remember doing, and there was 5 species on that flight point. So you have this extreme between. So our density range, to give you an idea, is we've hit densities of half a deer per square kilometre to best part of 200 per square kilometre, and that's across the UK, across different species. So huge areas where there's the average is less than 1, and then other areas like urban woods where the effective density is over 200. So I think you could extrapolate this data set out more. It would require a bigger brain than mine, but the data's there to suggest it's localized issues, particularly fallow in say England is actually central, and southern England in particular is so it's a large area, but it's not across the whole of UK. So generalizing or standardizing the UK population is not what we see. We see, say, the North Pennines with hardly any deer. There's the odd roe deer hanging in there, and then we see in Norfolk 6 species. So it's the 2 million figure was one that has been getting used a lot. It's an estimate that's been thrown around based on different data sets. They're not based on my data sets. I think my data sets would show certain species are way more than people think, and others are probably around static or less than people think. But yeah, that's definitely a tough question.
People love a stat though, don't they, Ben? It can help drive a narrative, and I guess when you say there's 2 million across the country, it kind of I think the idea is to kind of refocus the mind that kind of browsing pressure is an issue. I wanted to ask you about obviously when you present your reports to the client, to the landowner. And you said I was quite interested. You say you kind of make recommendations. Is that I realise you've got to be quite kind of careful with what how you make recommendations. I was just kind of wondering whether, are you saying that an active cull would work here? Are you saying that fencing would work here? Are you actually going down into that kind of minutiae? Are you just basically saying you've got, and I'm going to throw a figure out there, 500 deer per square kilometre here, so we would recommend this? So I'm just wondering kind of how that looks.
Yeah, so I don't go down the route of telling them what I think they should do, unless they explicitly say it's like a council or someone like that, and they've got a few deer trapped inside a hospital, and then you could say you've got 10 deer trapped within this fence line. This is the breakdown male female calf ratio. This is what I recommend you do. You try and push them out the fence, and then this is the next steps if you can't get those deer out. So there's that element. Some clients will say, especially forestry ones, will say this enclosure is a no tolerance. Tell me every single deer that's in there, and then that's they'll go and lethally cull them. But we quite often get sporting clients as well that want to maintain a certain age class of mature animals. So they're interested in is, am I hitting the right profile of that upper end? That's not the typical client, but we do get those requests. So when I say tailoring the conclusion or the recommendations, it's really saying this is what you've got in terms of density. Now and again, I'll pull in comparisons to similar landscapes within that region. So I will never quote someone else's data, but I can say sometimes if you've got 15 deer per square kilometre across 3 species as a minimum here, that is in line with the rest of that shire. So we've got enough data where we can make comparisons, and interesting things as well come of that. So with having the ability to compare against other data sets, we did one recently, and we said, yeah, your density is very similar to your neighbouring landscape, because we did that landscape last year. However, you've got far more muntjac than they do, and you've got less roe. So they've got more roe, and it's a widely held belief, when muntjac increase, roe decrease. And some of our data sets pull those things out as well. So when that end section is really, well, what does the client want from this? Do they want to know what is in the landscape, and is that low, medium, high based in our experience across that shire or country or UK level, or is it sporting, or is it zero tolerance?
So, for instance, if a landowner is looking at for like landscape scale management, and obviously we're focusing on trees, so woodland management, and that they know that they've got a lot of deer from your report, or not a lot of deer, and then they can tailor the management for that. Do you see that as quite a lot that comes through for you? Because obviously, especially where I am, like you were saying, sorry, like across the country it's different, and like where I am, it's the impacts on trees and woodlands is significant because of the number of different species that we have, and they're different, the way that they browse and the way that they impact them, but obviously the numbers as well. So a woodland owner here would like to know the numbers that they've got so they can put effective management in place for the health of their woodland. Is that quite a common one that you get come through for specifically woodlands?
Yeah, there's definitely been a big surge, and maybe this is where in terms of the deer side, England's got a step forward there compared to even Scotland, even though Scotland's been very proactive for maybe longer in deer management groups and collaboration and so on, is the recent grants. So what we're seeing is quite a big push from the FPL grant and also the WS1 and 2 grant, where we're seeing landowners taking control a bit of, or upping their game in terms of monitoring, recording, and finding out what's there. So we've got quite a lot on the back of those grants for people to get a baseline. Now, there is a mentality from the past, well, it's not necessarily past, it's still there, where you just look at impact. So you keep culling deer until you see the impact reverse. But what I think people are doing, because these, there's the grants and they're time bound and, delivery is, well, get that baseline, get the drone survey done sooner at the beginning of a project, and then you can work off that baseline. And I mean, what we find is a lot of these estates that get us in, they then want to do it repeat basically. So we'll get some estates wanting one a year, maybe one every 2 years, and the extreme end is some estates get us in 3 times a year. And that is really to just track what recruitment, what's emigrating from the landscape in, and what's getting recruited in. So despite what they cull, what is coming into that woodland, and how is that affecting the impact of either regeneration or the trees they've planted. I mean, I will just add, it is extremely challenging for the certain landowners, because when you're dealing with a transient species such as fallow, and I'll refer to fallow just because we're talking about the south of England, but equally red and to an extent sika, you can put in, you can plant those trees unprotected or hope for regeneration, but when some of these large herds come through, it does not take much to have an impact. So, which is ties then into fencing. Do fences work? Well, a lot of our jobs, we count a higher density inside a fence proportionally to outside a fence. The fences are extremely hard to keep deer tight, especially over a 5-year period, or however long it's required to get the trees above vulnerability height. And then obviously you've got the tree shelter element too, the non-plastic, which you guys are obviously sort of spearheading and pushing. So it's definitely not an easy answer, and it's easier for certain parts of the country with certain species present as it is to others.
Thank you, appreciate that. And finally, I guess we got to end on a little bit of a humorous note, I guess, Ben. But my mind is wearing. You send your drone up into these woodlands and various areas, and you're using thermal imaging and things like that. So I think I alluded to before that you probably see all sorts of things happening, and probably nocturnal activities we're not allowed to talk about on a family podcast. But is there anything that you've had to track, or is there anything that's strange you've been asked to follow? Or
yeah, we inadvertently come across things all the time. So we found people stealing at night in industrial parks. That was quite interesting, getting the police, and then we were tracking them with the drone until the police came and caught them. We saw a car crash happen, which was a bit bizarre.
Oh, wow.
Randomly, there was a turkey in the middle of a wood in the middle of nowhere. The wild boar thing creeping in is always many miles from their location. Or known location, we'll find boar often. But yeah, I mean, probably the most bizarre, if we talk about the most bizarre, I was thinking about this the other day, and I was chatting to someone, and there's probably 3 things that stick to mind. So one job was in Germany, and it was about minus 15 Celsius. It was very, very cold, wind chill. And I thought that in the thermal signature, I thought it was like this enormous sort of bonfire in the middle of the forest. But what it was dozens. Well, I think the biggest group I saw was 15, but it varied from several to 15 wild boar all piled up in a heap. They were all fighting for the center spot of this bundle. So that was a really smart one. Another was the wallabies in the Isle of Man. So there's several hundred wallabies in the Isle of Man living wild, and we've counted that population twice now, in the last 2 years. And that you'll never get used to that in an island off the west coast, of just seeing, a field of up to 40, 50 wallabies at night. I mean, that is the most bizarre thing. And the Manx Wildlife Trust are actually just about to release this year's report, which shows the figures. So that'll be an interesting one to see how that goes down. And then probably the most bizarre was earlier this year was Honshu, the monkey that escaped from the Highland Wildlife Park. So that got sort of international media attention, and it was such a strange thing. I got called in for that, and sort of day 2 we found him. I got him next to the A9. He was running up and down the road, but he was not in a safe spot for the keepers to dart him. So day 3 the weather was really bad, so nothing happened. Then day 4, all the media had flocked there at that point. So there was maybe half a dozen camera TV stations there, and we were getting calls from like all the different, like Al Jazeera and New York Times and all these channels. And there's just something clicked with that monkey internationally, that they thought of it as Braveheart, trying to fugitive monkey. But it was turned up in a feeder a few miles away from the park, eating peanuts on a bird feeder. So managed to go and track it on the roof, and then the keepers arrived, darted him, gone back safely. It was covered by ITV Live at the time, so it was Rylan, I think, was covering that story, and the Bondi vet. So that was probably the most bizarre one, going from counting hundreds of deer a week to just finding this single monkey amid sort of international attention. So that's definitely been a bit of a strange highlight in the last few years.
Oh, excellent. So we're talking to a genuine worldwide celebrity here, then, Katie.
Yeah.
Wouldn't say that. But no, it was a very strange one, going live on ITV to talk about how you found a monkey. But it was quite funny actually, because that was the first primate that I'd filmed, and when the drone actually lowered down towards him, he was intrigued by it, and actually came out to look at the drone, which you don't really get from the UK wild animals. They don't generally go out looking for it. But it was almost too human for me compared to my usual target species.
Please tell me you sold the media rights, Ben. There's an opportunity there. You shouldn't have let that footage go anywhere.
No,
a good fee on it.
We were busy enough, to be honest. We were busy enough, so we just as long as they put BH Wildlife Consultancy, we were quite happy. But it's that was definitely the most bizarre one.
I think that's a movie waiting to happen. That is.
Definitely. Well, thanks, Ben. We really appreciate your time and coming on and being our first guest. And
thank you.
Guest being our guinea pig or monkey. We really appreciate what you've the information you brought to us and your experience, and thanks for talking to us. Well, Katie, I thought that was a great conversation with Ben. I learnt so much. You think that you kind of know various things, but then somebody comes along who knows what they're talking about and probably makes you look a bit of an idiot, and you're kind of humbled. And I really enjoyed that chat with Ben. I think what I kind of gained from that the most was firstly his passion for helping landowners to understand the issue of browsers on their land.
Definitely.
I really appreciated his discussion around that. I like the gear as well. We had this chat.
I know you do. But I know you do.
Kind of the drones and things like that. And I was gonna be a little bit cheeky with him and ask him if he's really seen anything dodgy in woodlands. But a family podcast, we need to be careful. But you can see how the work that he's doing and the fact that it's now countrywide and has become really popular is helping to establish what the issues actually are. We know that we have a deer problem, and I'm doing the inverted commas thing to camera here, but nobody can see it. We have deer issues, but how can we I don't want to use the word target, but how can we implement particular solutions, or like simple things like fencing, things like that, if we don't actually know where the deer are and how they move around?
Yeah, that was one of the most interesting things that I thought came from what he was saying about how I think, yeah, like I said when we were having the chat with Ben, I'm so focused on my area where it's, deer is such a big barrier for woodland creation that you seem to forget that there's some areas where they're not such a problem, or the species that they've got there impact things in a different way. And yeah, like you say, him and his team being able to build up them data sets to do things in a site specific way, which we should be doing anyway, even with the planting down to the species choices that we're doing, everything needs to be site specific. But yeah, but I think the problem has come from when we bring it back to plastic tree tubes and things like that. It's just become this is what you do everywhere sort of type of method for tree planting, even though we use it now primarily for deer protection, obviously as well, as timber and things like that, to get straight trees, but it is primarily to protect against browsing animals. Yet we're putting it in areas where they might not necessarily be as problematic. So yeah, it all links to each other, and like you say, how we protect things. But I think because we had such a good chat with Ben and we've covered so much, we were going to talk about other browsing animals today as well, and other things like squirrels and rabbits and hares and voles. But I think we're going to focus this just on deer this time around. What do you think, Mike? Because there's so much to cover, and then we can chat about that in another episode.
Yeah, that would make total sense, and we couldn't do it justice, could we, Katie? If we try and I think we do have issues with grey squirrels as well up in the Dales. So yeah, the conversations that we can have in future podcasts. It's your fault, Ben. Obviously, you are listening. It's your fault. You've completely ruined our podcast planning for the next few issues because you were so good.
Well, the hat is random, but I won't use the hat because obviously we know we're going to chat about that next time. So I will put that to one side, and then all other topics shall be random from then on.
So, Katie, I guess the question should be, and we'll try and keep this as brief as we can, but what can we do? We've spoken about fencing in the past, and we've spoken about different types of tree protection from 0.6 tubes all the way up to those massive 1.8 tubes which tower over your head. There's so many things that can be, I put on my notes here, what can be done, and I don't think that's the right phrase really. It's kind of how can we kind of manage the problems of deer. And I guess I'm just going to put it out there, without those large predators that we would have had centuries ago, that would have kept the deer on the toes and moving around and kept the ecosystem in balance. I'll just put that one over to you, Katie. There, that's a nice easy question for you to solve.
Okay, I will come up with a solution. No, I don't think there is a solution, and I mean that's what there's so many really knowledgeable and talented people that are trying new things, trying different ways. But I think it all does come down to population sizes in some areas where that's the problem. So that obviously links to stalking and culling things. Like you say, we don't have bears and wolves and things like that to do it anymore. So it leads to human beings having to sort of fill that niche. Obviously, there's a byproduct from that. You get meat, so that a natural wild living animal rather than a factory farmed animal. So it is good quality meats that can go into the human food chain. But there's so much to talk about around that. I think again we'd have to do another episode around that to really get into the nuance of it, because there's a difference there. It's not being done for sport, and I think that's what's different between the sort of traditional hunting side of things, where which deer were brought over for originally, like we were talking about earlier, which was for sport, whereas, and that does still happen, but what we're talking about is in the context of population management for conservation, which is not a sport in its sense. It is culling, so it's for a purpose. But again, yeah, that is a huge conversation. But that, yeah, if that's the right thing to do in that area, that is the right thing to do. That comes with a whole landscape scale issue, because people own different bits of land, different landowners. Someone might be doing a lot, but they just might be pushing that fallow herd into someone else's land where they're not doing anything. So, you know, you might only be making a small dent in the problem. It is really difficult. But yeah, there's other ways of protecting things. So if we're doing planting projects, or we've gone into our woodland and we want to do some coppicing, and you know, but we're worried that as soon as them trees start regenerating, the deer's going to come through and nibble them off, we can fence the area. And there's so many different types of fencing now. Obviously, there's the sort of permanent deer fencing, but then you've got like Harris fencing and things like that, which obviously you can move around. There's tree shelters out there, which obviously we talk about a lot, and the different types of them. And then, you know, there's conversations out there now about people talking about introducing species like lynx and things like that that were natural predators of smaller deer like roe. So I don't know if any you know, what projects are going on with that. I have to do some research, but you know, that's another thing that people are looking into. So there is so much out there that we can do to try and manage the problem or protect our trees, but it's a landscape scale problem in certain areas that need to sort of be looked at collectively. Yeah, it's complex, as with everything.
Yeah, that's definitely right, and I think that, you know, we need to have a public conversation, don't we? And I know that the John Muir Trust have you know, over the last year have done various kind of films talking about the deer problem, and I think as they titled it. But it's a difficult conversation to have, isn't it? You know, I've got a landowner that has 2 roe deer going through their woodland, and they like them there, but they're eating the trees. You know, so it's that kind of, you know, we can try and get them out, but you know, the fences are too low, and she sends a little dog, and then they are removed. So, but it's a difficult conversation to have. You know, what are, you know, what's our first kind of contact with deer? It's Bambi, isn't it? So you know, and having that conversation is difficult, but needs to happen, I guess, if we're going to, you know, increase you know, woodland cover across the country. And that's not just kind of broadleaf cover, is it? You know, that includes kind of some of the more mixed woodlands and more commercial plantations as well.
It is a hard thing to talk about, because this is where it's complex. It's not black and white, like kill the deer or let all the deer live. There's so much grey in there. Like, you know me, I love wildlife. There is nothing like, you know, the pictures that people share of deer, and you know, red deer during, you know, the rut, and beautiful. You know, having them in the landscape is beautiful, and that's the thing. We're not talking at all about removing them from the landscape. That is not what anybody wants. It's about when things have tipped over that balance point, let's say, where it's causing problems for other wildlife and for ecosystems to continue. It's a difficult conversation to have, because you do have to resort to culling in some instances. But again, you know, there's, like we mentioned it, you know, in our chat with Ben, there's impacts on the health of the deer herds as well when they get too big. You know, so there's a welfare thing there with that. But it is a really complex thing. And I think that as well, you know, we do have to look at it with a big lens, and think, you know, if, say, for instance, a woodland's not regenerating, and you haven't got that understory, and I know there's various different people doing research on things like this, but you know, how is that impacting woodland birds and how they're nesting if they don't have that understory? How is it impacting other species that use woodlands and use hedgerows, that rely on these trees and the way that they grow? So, you know, it could potentially have a knock-on effect to things, but you know, in the end, the balance is off, basically. You know, we don't have any large predators anymore to do the job, so things have sort of gone out of kilt a little bit. So it's kind of like, yeah, these things need to have intervention at times, but it's a difficult conversation. But that's what it is. It's a conversation, isn't it? Everybody can have their own thoughts and opinions on it, and we can come together and try to come up with the best way to go about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and there are some strong opinions out there, Katie, aren't there? You know, at the Forest Plastics Working Group's 2003 conference in Leeds, there was a panel in the afternoon which I sat on, and we had a lady there from a rewilding place in Scotland. And it's so bad that I can't remember. I'll put it in the show notes. I can't remember her name, but you know, she was quite adamant that you can't control deer, and if you do, they come back. And I think some of the things that Ben was saying kind of indicates that you can't have a light cull, really.
No.
You know, it's got to be quite heavy. And then she started talking about the fact that they're sentient beings, and also the effect it has on the colours as well, on the shooters. So yeah, there's lots of things to consider, but I guess if we strip it back at the moment, you know, we've got a climate crisis. One of the best ways of mitigating the impacts of the climate crisis is planting trees, and we're not going to be able to plant the amount of trees that we need to, or create that habitat that we all love and enjoy, without some type of control of those browsers. And I know we're going to talk about kind of rabbits and voles. Voles are the bane of my life in the Dales in a future episode. So we have to have these conversations now, don't we? And at some point, you know, there needs to be a strategy across, you know, England and obviously Scotland and Wales. You know, Scotland seem to be getting their kind of act together on having some kind of strategy as well. I know people keep talking about there's a strategy, but unless there's, you know, some kind of, as you say, not just landscape style strategy, but a countrywide, then we're going to be having this conversation in kind of 5-10 years time, aren't we? So I know that some people want, as you say, want links to be introduced, and you know, I would be game for that, to be fair. You know, it would be absolutely amazing to have those kind of big mobile predators back in the landscape. Unfortunately, I'm not sure they're going to do the job. I think you said before that, you know, the lynx will predate on predominantly roe. You know, they might have a look at the odd red here and there, but that doesn't solve the issues that you've got down in Essex with you know, the muntjac, which just kind of, you know, getting everywhere and things like that. So it's just not an easy solution, is there?
No, not at all. And I think comes the problem of livestock then as well, where they can roam to on different people's land. Obviously, we have this now with beavers, don't we? Absolutely amazing ecosystem engineers. They are fabulous for our river systems and creating habitats and flood management and everything. But land is so split up now, different landowners. That's why it's so difficult to introduce these species again. But again, we can have another episode about different species like that and their impacts on trees and woodlands, Mike, can't we? I mean, there's so much to talk about, but I'm thinking I might bring the energy up a bit, because I know it's quite a deep topic to talk about. But would you like a game? Would you like my random fact game?
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, remind me of what the score is again, Mike.
I'm not going to remind you of the score, because you know the score.
1-0. Woo! So you've got a chance to redeem here. So I'm going to do it similar to before. So I've got 3 facts about 3 different species of deer. 2 of them are true and 1 of them's false.
Okay.
So you've got to work out which one's which. Are you ready?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so Chinese water deer were first kept at London Zoo, but they escaped from Whipsnade Zoo in 1929. So their numbers have increased through introductions into deer parks, but also through escapes and releases as well. But the British population are now thought to account for more than 10% of the total world's population of Chinese water deer. So that's the first fact. Second one is muntjac were brought over from Japan in the early 20th century. They are now widespread and increasing in their number and range. They were brought over for sport and for meat, so hunting them, but in some instances they have been kept as pets due to being similar sizes to dogs and small livestock. And the third fact is Sika deer in the UK were introduced from the Far East into Britain in 1860. Whilst animals from a number of sources were introduced into enclosed parks, the only free living form in Britain is considered to be the Japanese Sika. But it is also possible that almost all of them, if not all, living in England, Scotland and Ireland are descendants from one stag and 3 hinds that were introduced in Ireland in 1860 from one estate.
Oh, well, thanks for that.
A lot of info there, but yeah.
Well, I mean, any of those could be true. And I like them all. I like them all. I can wholeheartedly believe all 3.
Yeah.
I wasn't convinced with the Sika one, but that's probably the most plausible. So, and I like the first one as well, the A or number 1 of whichever way we're going to say it. So I'm going to go for fact 1 being true.
Yep.
And it's probably going to be a coin flip between 2 and 3. But I think 3 sounds so outlandish that it can just be a descendant from one particular stag and 3 hinds. But then again, isn't there some sort of stat about kind of Genghis Khan and things like that involving human population? So I'm going to go with that one. Not Genghis Khan. I'm going to go with 1 and C or A and 3.
As being correct ones.
Yes.
And the one about muntjac being wrong.
Yeah, but I do like that one as well. But yeah, I don't know how you can keep a muntjac as a pet. I can't see you walking, up to the shop with a muntjac on a lead. But you never know. You never know. Strange things happen down my way, so it wouldn't surprise me.
So I can confirm that you are correct.
Yay!
Yeah. So that one was incorrect. So firstly, they're not from Japan. They're from China. And secondly, I do not know if anyone has kept them as pets. Any research I've done on them, people say don't go near the males, that they're quite aggressive. So I don't think it would be advisable to have one as a pet. But yeah, well done. You've scored a point, first point of the series. And all 3 of these deer are ones that we were talking about earlier as being introduced species. So none of these are native. As I've said, because I've said they've all been introduced. So clearly I've mentioned that. But yeah, so, you think they've been over since, some like 1800s, late 1800s. It's not a long time, really, that they've been in the country for.
Very true. Very true. Well, I'm glad that I think it's now 2-1 because I think you won the last one. But it's good to pull a point back. And if anybody is keeping a muntjac as a pet, if they could write to us or drop us a line, that would be great.
Woohoo! 2-1. Well, I said 1-0 a minute ago, completely forgetting that we're on episode 3. So yeah, that's nice to know. But yeah, so we've still got plenty of episodes left, so you've still got time to catch up. But yeah, so I won't pull anything out of my magic hat. I do have it here. It's a wind woolly. I will save that for next time because we're going to carry this one over, aren't we, Mike, into another episode to chat about other browsing animals as well. So the lovely squirrels, voles, rabbits, hares, things like that, and protection for them. So yes, we're going to do that next time. And yes, we'll end up talking about deer as well, to be fair. All links up.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could talk about deer for weeks and speak to various people to help us out. But yeah, I've enjoyed this podcast, Katie. I think this has been it's been good. It's been great to speak to Ben and to catch up with you. I do have a couple of all important parish notices. So if the rest of everybody could stop the cars and wherever they are, and obviously listen, but do it safely. That's the important thing. We don't want to get slamming your brakes on the M6 or whatever. But the obvious parish notices are the first one: please head to the Forest Plastics Working Group plastic.co.uk's website, where you can find kind of hints and tips on managing plastic. There's various case studies and things like that. There's also the Plot That Plastic app that Katie has developed with various partners. The more people who could use that, the more idea we have of where plastic is in our woodlands, and then we can target hubs and collections and things like that. So that's really important. The second parish notice, if you could just probably start moving off at about 5 miles an hour now, because we don't really want you to miss it, is we're receiving some really nice feedback already. This is episode 3 and we've had some really nice feedback already. If you could, I know it's that cheesy thing, if you can like, comment and subscribe, that really helps us get more people interested in the forestry and woodland creation and plastic and things like that. It really does help us, and it also gives me and Katie a little bit of a pat on the back as well, because sometimes it does feel like we're just talking to ourselves, Katie, doesn't it? Which is, there's nothing wrong with that, but it'd be nice to know there's people out there. And we are planning to do a episode in a not too distant future, which is just a basic Q&A, and you can ask us questions about anything within reason. And the third notice I'd like to say is I listened to a really good podcast this week on some of the ash woodlands and other woodlands in Borrowdale as well, so I'll put that in the show notes. It's the Countrystride Podcast, and it's well worth listening to if you want to know about kind of Atlantic rainforests and lichens and things like that. It is more exciting than I've made it sound there, Katie, but I know you'd like it.
I'll definitely give it a listen. Yeah,
brilliant. It is well worth listening to, and yeah, I was kind of blown away by just the information I gained from that podcast. So yeah, this has been great, Katie. It's always good to have a chat to you, and we'll do it again, I guess, at some point.
Yeah, let's do it. No, always a pleasure. And thank you guys for listening.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.